Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Coming soon, Brexit, the day after. A cliffhanger in every sense of the word, as business leaders warn Theresa May about the prospect of a cliff edge of sudden and overnight change when Britain leaves the European Union. The Prime Minister has been trying to calm nerves. She told the CBI they needed some certainty about Brexit and appeared to water down her pledge to put workers on company boards. Our political editor Gary Gibbon has this report.
This was a moment for Theresa May to reach out to business leaders who've been alarmed by her finger-wagging and warnings to them. Brexit gives us quite enough uncertainty, some business people have been telling government. Theresa May cheered them up by watering down her campaign commitment to put employees on company boards.
While it's important that the voices of workers and consumers should be represented, I can categorically tell you this is not about mandating works councils or the direct appointment of workers or trade union representatives on boards.
The CBI president has been amongst those in business calling for a smooth transition to whatever follows EU membership. A period, probably several years, of something closer to current EU rules for business.
The president of the CBI was asking for a transitional period, an interim arrangement that smooths the Brexit path. Some of your MPs are saying don't go near it. Which side are you on?
I'm conscious that there will be issues that will need to be looked at. I understand the point that Paul has made. Others have made this point, that people don't want a cliff edge. They want to know with some certainty how things are going to go forward. That will be part of the work that we do in terms of the negotiation.
So, if the 2 years negotiating our exit doesn't give enough time to negotiate the much more complex future trade relations with the EU, Theresa May might be willing to consider a temporary interim state for several years.
She promised to heed your requests for a smooth transition, not a cliff edge.
Well, there's more still to be done on that front. I think what she was saying was that she recognised the uncertainty that was created. And I think that's something that we have been talking about, particularly around investment decisions.
A number of the larger construction-oriented projects are starting to get delayed. So they're not quite cancelled yet, but they're starting to get delayed. So whilst you hear all the good stuff in the press about PMI and indexes, the fact is actually people aren't investing as strongly.
The darker stuff is a bit quieter, isn't it? People don't like to advertise that.
I don't think we've been hit yet.
Business leaders here felt the Prime Minister had tried to reach out to them after a choppy start to the relationship.
Did she sound a bit less hostile, the Prime Minister, towards business?
A lot more conciliatory, yeah, absolutely.
Have you been worried?
I think there's been some early signs, the punishments she's meted out to business. It's been not the easiest start, but a little bit more promising. Yeah.
I thought she levelled it out very well, actually. I thought
a bit softer than she was, a bit less hostile to business. Did she sound
absolutely.
There?
Yeah, no,
calmed it down a bit. Someone's been speaking to her, haven't they?
Listening, perhaps even. Yeah, no, I thought she did. I thought she did a good job. I think there was a lot of anxiety in the room.
The Brexit Secretary, David Davis, has been paying a visit to the corridors of the European Commission to meet the man in charge of the negotiations, former Commissioner Michel Barnier. He didn't want any cameras, and his tweet suggests he didn't particularly want the meeting. This morning, courtesy visit from David Davis at his request. No negotiation without notification. My work is now focused on the EU 27. Jeremy Corbyn has this evening made his first speech to the CBI conference. He mocked the government's backtracking on workers on boards.
Government supporting business and giving you the tools you need to improve the well-being and prosperity of our country and its people.
Theresa May had long since gone off to a Cambridge lab to plug her announcement that $2 billion a year by 2020 would be spent on research and development. The details on that are still to come. Any details on Brexit a long way off.
And Gary joins us live from Westminster. Now, Gary, we have a new policy on Brexit now?
Wouldn't jump the gun on that one. This wasn't an intentional policy announcement by the Prime Minister. She said or hinted at slightly more than she intended to say or hint at here. But what it did reveal is some of the thinking that's happening behind the scenes. There is a growing realisation across the range of government ministers who are involved in Brexit that an interim deal, some sort of transitional arrangement might be necessary. And that's because the Brexit negotiation is time limited to 2 years. The trade relationship that you want to move to, well, the average trade negotiation as complex as this can easily be 5, 6, 7 years. You can see there's a gap there, and you plummet down into something called, without being too technical, WTO rules, World Trade Organization rules, and as I say, without going into the detail of that, they might serve nobody. So there is this growing realization behind the scenes, bubbling up, you sense, that there could well need to be transitional arrangements.
Well, it doesn't sound like the language of David Davis and Mr. Fox. Is everybody happy about this?
No, you can't get everybody to agree about the spelling of Brexit, probably, in this place. And no, they're not happy about it. There are people who worry that what a transitional arrangement might be, it is far too close to Europe, virtually membership of the European Union, and not properly time limited. That's another thing you hear from some leavers, though even amongst them they acknowledge there could be such arrangement. For Theresa May, I think she's concerned, amongst many other things, about showing the voters that something has changed in our fundamental in a relationship with Europe, and she would want a very significant break to happen before there was a general election. So a lot of forces pulling in certain directions.
Gary Gibbon in Westminster. Cathy.
Thanks, John. Well, business leaders are clamouring for certainty and a post-Brexit plan. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has been talking to some leading figures and joins me now. So, Siobhan, are businesses going to get what they want?
Well, Cathy, as Gary said, the tone was much warmer toward business today, but the content in terms of the details around the negotiation of the exit was not any more detailed at all. So most business leaders that I spoke to said they had the same uncertainties before and after Theresa May spoke today. But crucially, they seemed to be happy to give her the benefit of the doubt for now. Certainly none of them were happy to come out and publicly criticise the Prime Minister, but that doesn't mean they're satisfied with the status quo either. Here is what Sir Martin Sorrell of WPP said to me earlier.
There's a nagging doubt as to whether the government really has it all worked out and whether they're just doing it, out on a limb, playing it by impromptu. But today, in answer to your question, probably very limited reassurance for business, same level of uncertainty. I don't think that's been reduced.
So, Siobhan, where does that leave business leaders then?
Well, for some, like the boss of Airbus, the big aerospace company I spoke to today, they've already made big investment decisions. So they're happy, he says, to sit back a little bit and be patient. But other bosses who've got big investment decisions coming up, those are the ones looking for that clarity, for the clarity of the negotiations. But what they heard from the Prime Minister today was, I'll give you the details when I can, but I'm not going to give you a running commentary. She repeated that mantra. Now, for them, in the face of that, what they're telling me is that they are going to sit on their hands and to delay those investments. And what that means, obviously, it will have a profound knock-on effect, slowdown in the British economy. Now, the Chancellor knows this. He is currently preparing his autumn statement that he'll deliver on Wednesday. And what we will see him do is introduce a slew of measures to try and get those businesses going, to try and get them moving, to try and get them spending more around infrastructure and more spending in general. But he is limited in what he can do, his manoeuvrability, and whether or not he does enough to allay their fears around the uncertainty around Britain's future trading relationships is still very far from clear.
You'll be back for more on that tomorrow and Wednesday. Siobhan, thanks very much.
We certainly will.
John.
Joining us now from Parliament, Sir Oliver Letwin, the former head of the government's Brexit preparations, and with me here in the studio is the Labour MP, Alison McGovern. Sir Oliver Letwin, so there we have it. The Prime Minister has now talked about transitional arrangements. Does that bring a thrill up your spine?
I can't say it brings a thrill up my spine, but I think it's more or less inevitable. The fact is that leaving the European Union, for which there's a 2-year timescale set once Article 50 is triggered, is a different act from settling the long-term arrangements between the UK once it's left and the rest of the EU. And clearly in the end, but that might be a very long time away, there will have to be some set of treaties. Those take a long time to formulate and they take a long time to ratify. So it's always seemed to me extremely likely that after we've left, what immediately governs our relationships will be a set of transitional arrangements which can be agreed between the governments.
So that deals with a cliff edge, does it? I mean, they really were using very strong language, these business leaders today.
I think it can exactly deal with the so-called cliff edge. Clearly what's needed is a smooth path, and if this is the means by which ministers end up by agreeing a smooth path, I think everyone will be very relieved about that.
And from a Labour perspective, which is a very difficult one to divine, are you excited by this sudden determination of transitional arrangements?
Well, to be honest, John, it all still seems pretty chaotic. People from the backbenches have been asking the government to be more clear about what will happen between the exit deal and hopefully an eventual trade deal for ages. And this is the first indication that we've had that the Prime Minister is even listening. And then I hear that Number 10 have been rowing back on that position already. So it just seems like more indecision and chaos from the government. I think it's very hard to determine what their plan is for Brexit. And I know from businesses that this is incredibly worrying, whether or not they've got big investment decisions to make. Not understanding what the business environment will be like in the future is simply bad for our economy. And the government
in
have
fairness,
got to sort that out.
it sort of matches the chaos in the Labour ranks too. I mean, we have no idea where the Labour Party stands on what's going on.
Well, I don't think that's fair. I think what Labour politicians are really worried about is the impact on ordinary working people, whether that is the fact that people were told there'd be money for the NHS, and it seems hard to see that there will be, or whether that's the money in people's pockets and what's happening to wages. I'm pretty sure I speak for all of my colleagues in saying that is what we were concerned about.
Sir Oliver Letwin, the last country to get a transitional arrangement was Norway, and they've still got it. Sounds as if we're going to become a transitional arrangement nation, which means we'll be able to go on trading in the single market and have all the potatoes we want.
Well, there are many different ways in which you can have a transitional arrangement. It doesn't mean that it has to be exactly like the position vis-à-vis Norway at all. I think the point here is that when you talk about uncertainty, the nation voted to leave the EU.
Did it? No, I mean, that's a big question, isn't it?
Well,
a pretty
it's
even split.
No, it's not a big question. I voted to remain. The nation, by a majority of the people who actually turned up to vote, voted to leave. And now, we are therefore going to leave. I think that is how democracy has to work, though I didn't agree with the decision. It's the one that was made democratically. Having said that, it is inevitable that there will be a certain amount of uncertainty. And it's absurd for anyone, whether it's from the media or from the opposition or whatever, to complain about the fact that there is a certain amount of uncertainty when you're doing something which no country has ever before done.
But that's quite extraordinary, because there was a long build-up to the referendum, and indeed the government triggered the referendum. You would have thought they'd have had a plan for either eventuality.
You can't have a one-sided plan in a multi-dimensional negotiation. You can only have a settled approach to these things when you have negotiated, which is a very long and complicated process. And we all actually know that. If we give up for a moment being sort of part of the party political game or whatever and just concentrate on the facts, those are the facts. Now, the question then is, how do you manage that complexity and that uncertainty in a way that minimises the uncertainties for business and hence the uncertainties that affect people's jobs? And I think a transitional arrangement is one of the ways to do that.
Okay. You're looking incredulous.
I'm just puzzled by the multi-dimensional plan. I don't know what that really means, but this is pretty simple. The Prime Minister is caught between those on the hard right of her party who are just determined, at whatever the cost to the British economy, to sever all ties with Europe, and those in her party who are a little more realistic but seem to be out of control of this situation. And the Prime Minister, I think, demonstrated today that she's got to get a grip.
Sir Oliver, let's move on then to another aspect of this CBI conference, and that is the whole question of how business is to be treated in the coming months and years of this Conservative government. Now, the plan is to slash, we understand, corporation tax. Now, if the referendum has told us anything, and indeed if Mr. Trump's election has told us anything, many of the people who have voted in the way they have voted because they feel that the corporate elite have had it all their own way. What do? Come on, boys. Soon as it's done, let's cut corporation tax and give them even more money in their pockets.
Well, we'll have to wait for the autumn statement to see what the Chancellor announces, but I would have thought that your viewers would be most interested in the question, how much in aggregate does the government raise from business? How much does business contribute to the exchequer and to maintaining public services? Now, if it's the case that you can increase the total revenues gained from business by reducing rates and attracting more businesses to Britain, and thereby create more jobs and more prosperity and more tax revenue, that sounds like quite a sensible proposition.
Well, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I can hear bells ringing, which probably means you've got to vote.
Thank you very much.
Alison McGovern, thank you also very much.
Now, they're young, they're smart and they're tech-savvy, but could they be heading to Germany? Amid all the uncertainty about doing business and working in post-Brexit Britain, Berlin is over here trying to lure tech sector talent over there. 5 startups have already moved and 50 more are keen to follow. So how can Britain keep its position as the tech hub of Europe? Our economics correspondent Helia Ebrahimi has been finding out.
Berlin calling to the London scene. The tech, or maybe the techno economy, sensing an opportunity, as British startups are lured by rival cities making the most of Brexit uncertainty. Theresa May's £2 billion pledge for innovation, perhaps not enough to keep people here.
I think there's a battle between London and Berlin to be the tech hub #1. What we see after the Brexit is that a lot of companies with international talents, international staff, when they want to invest in this uncertainty, they are asking us if there is a business opportunity in Berlin. And yes, there are a lot of business opportunities in Berlin.
This pop-up is a German state-funded campaign. 5 UK companies have already relocated, with more now expected to follow.
A lot of our friends, they're actually coming to Berlin or to other places because the quality of life is actually quite a bit higher than here. And now that we don't know what's going to happen, especially if you're from the EU, you don't have a British passport. It just makes sense to explore other options.
Berlin is at the center of Europe. Geographically, it makes a lot of sense. They have a lot of infrastructure. It's much cheaper to live in Berlin than it is in London.
Entrepreneur Chloe Mackintosh built her multi-million-pound design empire with Made.com in 2010. She says while Britain was the best place to launch a company 6 years ago, these days she'd have to think twice.
If you think of the UK on the edge of Europe as a set of islands with very bad weather, if we don't make an extra effort to attract people to stay, and this is about the people already here, but the people also who potentially should be coming, then there is a risk that people will move.
So there is a risk that you would reconsider putting your HQ in the UK?
Absolutely. The risk is that I don't feel as welcome as I used to, and that sentiment will spread mostly for the people who are thinking of coming to the UK. There's an issue around keeping us here, but then there is this next generation of talented, skilled immigrants who are going to think twice about where they're going next. I was this unskilled immigrant that came to this country and created a 250 people company. I want other people to get this opportunity. This is for me the biggest risk.
Brent Hoberman was a pioneer of the late 90s .com boom, co-founding lastminute.com and selling it for more than $1 billion. These days he's trying to repeat the trick with his tech incubator firm, with the aim of launching 200 new companies in the next 5 years.
The warning to government is that the tech industry is a bellwether for the health of this country, and if we don't pay attention to its concerns and if we don't work hard to build the momentum here, we will lose that leadership mantle. And other countries are not asleep.
While the government will point to Facebook and Google's decision to add thousands of new jobs in the UK, the post-referendum rhetoric has been uncomfortable for an industry whose talent base is estimated to be 50% foreign. The Chancellor's autumn statement will need real substance, not just mood music, to keep Britain the innovation capital of Europe.
So Facebook might be expanding its workforce here, but how hopeful or otherwise should we be about Britain's post-Brexit place in the global economy? Well, with me now is Mariana Mazzucato, Professor in Economics of Innovation at Sussex University, and from Edinburgh, Merryn Somerset-Webb, Editor-in-Chief of the financial magazine Money Week. Merryn Somerset-Webb, let me start on you. So Berlin is really rolling out the red carpet for the tech people, and potentially they could have some success, couldn't they?
Well, of course. I mean, any city can have a go at taking some of London's business away, some of Britain's business away. But it's really important when we're talking about where businesses might go to think about why they came here in the first place. And businesses have been coming to the UK because it's been very, very open to investment, very open to entrepreneurs, because it has a legal and financial infrastructure that really works for new companies, particularly in the tech sector and in the fintech sector. And also because we've got a good supply of high quality labour. None of these things are going to go away as a result of Brexit. Well, we don't know what's going to happen as a result of Brexit yet, but I think you can say for sure that all those things will remain. So none of the things that bought companies here are changing.
OK, let me put that to Mariana Mazzucato. I mean, you've got Facebook, an extra 500 jobs, Google, an extra 3,000. I mean, things are potentially quite rosy in the UK, aren't they, post-Brexit?
Well, no, they're not. Many of these decisions had already been made before Brexit. The real question is what Brexit does, or the lack of plan around Brexit does to the real decisions that the companies are making on the type of jobs also that they're going to be bringing. I mean, one thing is coming here for sort of tax reasons. Another is actually building, for example, research and development facilities. And we know now that we are, if you want, risking to lose quite a bit, for example, of the European funding that we have been massive beneficiaries of in this country. But also...
Well, what about Theresa May talking about the extra $2 billion in R&D money today? I mean, she talked about backing the innovators. Didn't that sway you?
Well, I think, lots of these things could be, if you want, areas that you just tick boxes on. Now, whether you actually provide a systemic view and actually create a serious innovation ecosystem, for example, with patient finance, and they do have a patient finance review. Let's see where that goes. Currently, it's being run by someone who made lots of money in private equity, which we know is quite short run. Anyway, that's a great initiative to have a patient capital review. They have this challenge-driven R&D, which is also a good idea because you don't want to just be funding sectors. You want to be funding missions, big problems that lots of different sectors can catalyze around. But we should really be asking, I mean, especially given what the clip just showed, what Germany is doing is they're not just, if you want, creating startups for the sake of startups. The startups in both Germany, but also in Copenhagen, in Denmark, have been around big visions for transforming the country, not just the rate of innovation, but the direction. So Danish startups are actually providing services to China's green tech economy. China's spending $1.7 trillion on that. We don't have that systemic policy right now. And
let me put that to Merryn. A much bigger vision is needed. There needs to be a more systemic approach.
That's very possible, but it's also absolutely nothing to do with Brexit. I mean, you could have said that for the last decade, that the UK has not had a policy of encouraging particular sectors, a policy of advancing technology as a whole. But what we just heard from Theresa May today, I think, is that she wants to correct that. And on the matter of funds coming across from Europe into research and development, well, of course, her talk today also signalled that she intends to replace that post-Brexit from UK funds.
Well, I mean, to respond to that.
Well, wouldn't that be great? But the amount of money that we're going to be wasting on Brexit, will require cuts elsewhere. It's completely, I think, naive to think that we have an unlimited budget. And if we did, why haven't we been told about this unlimited budget for the last 5 years? Now, they're going to be actually spending money on paying KPMG, apparently, to actually help the government with Brexit. Let's look at what those fees will mean for, again, diverting funds away from what we actually should be doing, which is investing in the productive capacity of this country, which includes education, research, in all sorts of the, if you want, ecosystem of innovation, which is not just the kind of challenge funding, but also the educational system. Will that receive a net increase in investment in order to create this human capital that we'll need to innovate?
Merryn, can you answer that question?
Well, again, the problem with the UK education system is something that's been around long before Brexit. The endless conversations about, are we creating the kind of quality workforce that we need to build a productive economy? Well, where would it have come from before? I mean, you can't take any problem you can think of and blame it on Brexit. The problems in the education system existed before Brexit, and the tech sector did just fine. Brexit doesn't change that either.
OK, but one thing that is a big change from Brexit is freedom of movement. Theresa May made it clear that that was her red line. She was Home Secretary before, pretty hard line on that. That is going to change, and without the people, that is going to make an impact.
Yes, absolutely, and that's the thing that people worry about. When I talk to companies and they're concerned about what they're talking about, not any of the problems except for freedom of movement. Will they get the labour that they need? But if you think about it, if you've listened to the most hysterical of the anti-immigration stuff during the debates, no one has ever said that they would like to limit the supply of skilled workers. So, you know, there is ample room for every kind of permit system under the sun to allow the freedom of movement of the kind of labour that the tech sector in particular needs.
Very quick response, Marianne.
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that this is not about Brexit having caused these problems. The point is that the UK economy, exactly as you were saying, has been experiencing serious structural problems that would have required a government to really be able to tackle and to concentrate on that. What we now know is that the government's going to have to concentrate and be diverted on this whole Brexit problem.
But isn't it good news that the government now has to focus on these matters when it hasn't been forced to for the last couple of decades?
What they are doing. So they have a patient capital review, they have a challenge fund, they are talking about industrial strategy. Let's at least get that right and not just be patchy.
And I'm
surely
afraid
don't need just tax cuts.
I'm afraid we have to end it there. Merryn Somerset Webb and Mariana Mazzucato, thank you very much for joining us.